Hello, everybody. Welcome. Uh, we're still letting people join, so we can wait, for a little bit. But welcome to our session today. And this is the Reuters events of today. And the panel session is about transform your real-world data strategies with AI. And we have several panelists over here on the screen. And first of all, before we get to introduce our panelists, we would like to thank Veradigm for sponsoring this session. And from Veradigm, we have Jordan Overcash, who's Senior Manager, Solutions Management of Veradigm. We also have several esteemed panelists here. We have Lisa Pretty Paul Lodia, who's the U.S. Community Activation Lead at Pfizer. And we have John Diaz De Caro, Senior Director, Epidemiology, Latent Viruses at Moderna. And you have me, Kelly Zhou, who's the Head of Global Medical Analytics and Real Evidence at Viatris. So before we get started to dive into the topics of data and AI, I would like to take some time for you to introduce yourselves. So Jordan, would you like to say a few words about you?
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Yes, I'm here representing Veradigm. I am the very long title of Solutions Management, but I am the manager of our medical informatics and our data science team. So we are the group that is heavily involved in looking at the AI and the unstructured data that we have available to us and how we use that with real-world data and real-world evidence. So looking forward to the conversation. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. Lisa?
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here. I am the U.S. Committee Activation Lead here with Pfizer. It is a fairly new function that I have a pleasure of building and leading. The key focus for this function is how do we reach individuals knowingly and unknowingly impacted by rare diseases across communities. We work on building trust. We provide information and resources so that patients and caregivers can engage proactively in the healthcare system.
John?
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you for the invitation to be able to speak to you today. So my name is John Diaz de Caro, and I serve as the Senior Director and Lead Epidemiologist for Moderna's EB Epstein-Barr virus and latent virus vaccines. So my background is in epidemiology, and I have over a decade experience in this field, with a small stint in manufacturing, but now find myself in epidemiology. So at Moderna, we have built a very impressive AI infrastructure that we're really hoping to push mRNA medicines into overdrive. And so I'm excited to bring my own perspective into leveraging real world data and AI. And I'm very looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Kelly Zhou, head of Global Medical Analytics and Real World Evidence. I'm fairly frequent with Reuters events and really honored to be here. In fact, I'm one of the trailblazing women in the pharma industry honored by Reuters this year. So really happy to be part of this crowd. And we have a really large, set of folks who have signed on virtually. And as you can see in the chat box, we would like to interact with you by asking where you're from. And just to let you know, I'm actually sitting in New York City, so it will be really nice to see from everybody. And the first, Andreas responded that that's from Mexico City. So welcome everybody. So let's first of all talk about the role of unstructured electronic health record data in real world research. And the question is that what should researchers consider when choosing data sources and solution providers for EHR data? For example, either structured or structured such kind of real world data. Jordan, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. So there's a couple different areas you kind of want to focus on when you're thinking about a data set, especially with EHR data. So the diversity of the data set, for example, source fidelity and validation, as well as, the longitudinality of the patient population they have within that data set. So when we talk about like diversity in the data set, health equality is essential in healthcare. And so being able to have, multiple specialties, multiple practice sizes, good representation across the United States really makes that data asset a lot better to really show that health equity that we see. When we talk about fidelity and validation, right? So where is the data actually coming from? Are you getting it from the originators of the data, or is it passing through multiple different structures, layouts, where that continuity of the data, the actual interpretation of that data could be shifting many times before it actually gets in your hands? I know one of the good things here at Veradigm is we do have that data right there with us, since we are the originators of that data. And so as things change, as we need more information with AI, with unstructured information, you have that ability to kind of go back to that source, figure out what's going on, and pull that data through to make it more meaningful, not only for RWD, just data in general, but maybe for a particular analytics project that you have going on. So that talks about the fidelity and the validation. And then what's your longitudinality of your patients, right? Studies usually like about 6 months pre to about 12 months post. But, if you have 2-3 years worth of data for a patient, and you can follow them over that amount of time, that's a great way to show that your data is enriched and has what people might need to be able to do the analytics they need to do.
And Kelly, if I want to have a chance here, I want to double down a little bit there on Jordan's comments on some of the things to think about when you're thinking of working with a solution provider. Their reach is really important in a real world setting. I always ask about their approach, because I do think, to Jordan's point about the equity, that's important, and the access to different data sources come into play there. We do know that the health equity is important to healthcare, and so that is really a key area to always ask a solution provider. I also do think it's an opportunity to kind of reflect on how we actually use this data, right? Because we want to ensure that we're continuing that engagement with the patient so that they feel that they're receiving great care. It is important to be clear on what we're trying to solve for, because that's how we're going to use the data to enable that dialogue between the HCP and their patients. And so, for example, in the real world setting, things to think about is, how are HCPs trained in utilizing this data, especially when the reality is that they have limited time and how long they can spend with each patient. And then also kind of zoom out a bit here is, what are the roles of the multidisciplinary team, especially when you're talking about handoffs between a medical assistant to a nurse to a doctor? How are they actually using this unstructured data as well? I do think it's worthwhile to pause a bit and think about that dynamic within these healthcare systems, because it's going to look very different from one system to another. And I also think about the unstructured data to help understand the whole patient, right? Because if we don't understand what their living dynamics look like, their family dynamics, lifestyle, socioeconomic factors, that does play a role in how we enhance shared decision-making process that hopefully can result in a care that works for the patient.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan and Lisa. I really like the fact that, first of all, you emphasize the technicality side of diversity, equity. But then, Lisa, you also talked about patient perspectives as well as multi-stakeholder perspectives, such as healthcare providers. That sometimes some of those EMR notes and so on, that's very time consuming. So therefore, there's also a balancing act between the rich information that we can gain from those type of notes, versus sort of physician burnout and having a lot of information being there. And how would you systematically harness that kind of information? So Jordan, what do you think in terms of patient perspectives or provider perspectives?
Yeah, from the patient and provider perspective, I think one of the most interesting things you have to think about is, the more click boxes we give somebody, the more structured data fields we ask somebody to live within, the longer it takes them to chart, the more they're looking at their screen instead of looking at the patient. and the experience starts walking away, right? Maybe the patient doesn't want to come back because they didn't feel like they were actually engaging with their provider. So taking the burden off the provider of, okay, well, now I need to give you another box here. Oh, this really needs to be a drop down because I need to be able to capture it on the back side. Take that burden off them and take that on with AI and looking and mining through unstructured data. Let them do their day to day, and then we'll figure it out on the back end on how we take that unstructured information and get it in a way that is structured and can be used by analytics teams or different groups that might be needing it coded where it wasn't coded. So I think it's a very important thing to consider where do you put the burden? Do you put it back on a provider, or do you figure out a way to work with what you got, and to get what you need out of it? So.
And also, Jordan, much of the question sometimes is we have cross-sectionally very much wealth information from the notes, but then how would you think about longitudinality? How would you think about the journey of the patients? What are some sort of features in terms of making sure that we're not just looking at one snapshot, but we're looking at the entire journey of each patient?
Yeah, so when you look at like the provider populations, that's a big part of it, right? When you think family medicine and specialties that are seeing patients with chronic diseases, that's where you're going to kind of see that longitudinality sit a little bit better because it's not kind of a one and done with the patient. So, but again, with that, in those areas, you get a lot of general information and you might get bits and pieces that fill in gaps about a patient just as in the communication that they're having with their provider. Maybe it's not something that they're seeing their primary for, they're seeing a specialist for it, but in a communication with their provider, they're talking about what's happening with them in different areas and settings. And so having them continuously see one or two constant providers and being able to pick up those signals from specialists while watching what else is happening with them, right? You're getting the primary care provider information with that information, and it just gives you a wealth and a longitudinality and a way you can watch how people are progressing, even if it's not in whatever specialty you're looking for.
Right.
That's great.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead, John.
Sorry. Sorry to speak over you. So I think the longitudinality of care is important. I guess another way of saying it, right, is the continuity of care, right? And so I think in the real world, I think we need to consider that, people live their lives, they change jobs. And so there's constant enrollment, disenrollment from some of these data sets. And so I guess speaking to what Jordan was saying earlier, that's important to be able to choose the right data set to answer your research question, right? And every domain, I think, is different. Every research question, of course, is different. But I think keeping that in mind, that people obviously live real lives. And so there might be some missing data in some of these data sets as well. And that's a whole other topic that I think should be also considered.
Yeah, thank you, John. And since we're also having the intersection between electronic health records and artificial intelligence in this session, in terms of AI harnessing this kind of EMR data, we often always think about a framework, which is called risk-benefit framework. And then we talked about some of the benefits that we can, analyze cross-sectional information of patients, as well as tracking longitudinality of the patients for their journey. But John, what are some potential risks? We don't want to be naysayers, but we want to be cautious before going ahead, just harnessing such kind of a rich data.
Yeah, if you allow me. So I think when we talk about AI kind of in today's environment, we can't escape the topic of large language models. And so maybe if I can speak to it from that perspective, because I know several publications have come out with respect to utilizing large language models to do this type of analysis in electronic health record data sets. And so I think in using large language models, a key risk, of course, is hallucination. And I think we all kind of have heard about it before, where there are instances where some of these commercial models and even non-commercial models will provide inaccurate information that is not necessarily based on fact. And that's an error, right? And so, especially concerning if you are trying to glean any sort of clinical insights from the analysis. And so I think that's a big concern. And I think another, I'll say, risk or challenge is the fact that there's bias inherent in many data sets as well. And I think one of the, I guess, successes you can call it from the use of large language models recently and kind of diving into it is the fact that there is a very clear algorithmic bias that occurs in many of these systems, and that's kind of been brought at the forefront. And so, and that affects, of course, the output. And so I think all of these should be concerns when you use some of these technologies, some of these AI tools in your analysis utilizing the electronic health records.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And now, here we're talking about some of those benefits and also some of the challenges. Now, one other major challenge is really data sources. And it's really hard to, nail down and find the right data through the mechanism, which is called fit for purpose data. So the question here is that, can you share some specific case example of valuable insights gained from unstructured EMR data? Jordan, what do you think?
So we have a couple of different examples that I'll highlight that our Veradigm RWE team has done recently, where we've had to dig into the unstructured data. The first one I want to highlight is schizophrenic negative symptoms study, where we really dug into the notes to get a deeper idea and characterize the different episodes that we're seeing with schizophrenia. And that they actually were able to present that in ISPOR this past May. So that's a great example, right? Like when you talk about symptoms, especially like symptoms that, maybe the provider isn't documenting within the problem list, or, putting a code, an ICD code, maybe it doesn't have an ICD code, right? And so you lean a lot into the notes there to really get a sense of what's happening with that, especially a patient population like that. Another one that we really have been kind of digging into, and John, this is kind of sits in that large language model area, is documenting clinical decisions, right? So when we talk about did they or did they not do something? Is the patient happy with something, or are they not happy with something? Really, that really takes a clinical person usually to get in there and dig through the note, read all the notes, and really figure out what's going on. And so we have those situations where, we look at like vaccination. Are they discussing it? And then are we actually seeing that the patient's going to get the vaccination? So those different areas. And then you got areas where I think this came up from an audience question around, ADE signals, right? And how do we, request to determine if a patient or practitioner is reporting adverse events, and is there supporting evidence? Like, is there redness? Is there swelling? Is there something else that proves out the documentation of the actual adverse event? And so when in these examples that I give, one of the big things is, you can use AI as a tool, right, in these, but it shouldn't be replacing the humans, right? So you still need that some oversight from a clinical perspective, somebody reading it, making sure it's not hallucinating, doing those checks and balances, so we can ensure that the confidence level that we expect from somebody's eyes reading end to end on a note, we get that same confidence from a tool like AI. And so until especially in our realm, in Veradigm and life sciences, until we can prove that out, it's always a tool, and it's not going to, replace the, the clinical insight that we can have by somebody going in and doing a chart review on it. So.
Yeah, I really like what you said about, checks and balances. And we know that real world data are always messy. That's why, you have to have a balancing act, right? You cannot sort of completely just say, delete all the outliers and then just cleanse it to the point that that's no longer real world. And then you want to make sure some of the outliers may have their own mechanisms and they gave some potential insights. So when we are harnessing data, finding the right data is really important, but using the right methodology to handle this kind of messiness of the data, that's also really important.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to get back to Lisa. Lisa, you have really wealth of knowledge in terms of patient perspectives. How would you think, the industry can create a tech ecosystem to support the patient journey?
It's a great question, Kelly. It's one that I don't know if we'll have a lot of time in this period to kind of talk through, but I do think there are some key points to keep in mind, right? In the work that my team and I, we are involved in, we've learned a lot about patient surveys. We've learned a lot about challenges in understanding the patient experience, especially factors that include how the surveys are distributed, how long is the survey, who's delivering them, the medium choice for surveys. And that's crucial because depending on how you actually deploy these surveys, those are the types of insights you'll come back with, right? And so when we're doing these community engagements, we're deploying all these different types because we want to make sure we're getting a more holistic point of view to help us understand how can we improve the engagements. Are these engagements actually increasing the likelihood that the patient will engage in a healthcare system? And do we actually see this get validated by HCPs at the point of care? These are really important questions because, among many others, they help gather patient insights. And so why is that important when you think about the tech ecosystem for a patient? Well, we have to make sure that we understand what the dynamics look like, because with AI, we have a great opportunity to be more specific, more personal to an individual. And if it's done well, the experience of a patient will be well understood and captured for better care, right? I think each one of us would love to have that personalized care. And so in order to have that, we need to understand that in order to create that tech ecosystem, that patient journey, we have to get a good sense of what that characteristic look like of that ecosystem that the patients are part of, especially when they're navigating the healthcare system, because that's going to look very different. It's going to be very local. And then that can help drive these patient insights that will determine the appropriate level of technology that can be used in that ecosystem. So essentially, to kind of summarize here, we're trying to meet the patients where they are. And in order to do that, we also have to understand the right technology that can support these interactions.
Thank you. Very well said. And audience, if you do have questions, you're welcome to enter in the chat. We've already seen quite a number of questions coming through. We'll have sufficient time to answer all your questions if possible. So next, we want to talk about AI models. We want to particularly focus on the quality and the reliability of natural language processing models. So Jordan, what are some of the key advantages of your Veradigm's NLP models, and how would you ensure the quality of data being used for clinical research?
So and this is, where my passion sits. So if I'm beaming ear to ear, it's because I think we have a great team that works really well together. And what makes it work is the fact that we have, and I mentioned it in the last statement as well, is we have clinical staff working very closely with our data science team while the modeling is happening of whatever we're trying to gather insights on. So when we talk, like when we're just looking to enhance like our real world data to make what we have in our structured data more valuable, we'll enhance, particular elements around that data. It might be an assessment that isn't usually captured within structured data, or it may be a lab that, because of how it's being entered or how it's coming back from labs, the variability is so great that we want to make sure that we capture all those labs and get them normalized and in a way analytics can use it. So having a data science and a clinician embedded with each other as it's going on, what that allows is to ensure when we say we have enhanced an element or we're providing you more insight coming out of unstructured or semi-structured data, is we can say with confidence that we are got a 93% accuracy on accurately, capturing that data. So, most of our elements sit at like a 98 or higher, but that is our threshold, right? We want to make sure if we're going to put it in front of somebody to use as part of an analytics, study or in any type of work they're doing with real data, that they have the confidence in what we've provided. So, like to John's point about hallucinations, right? We want to make sure that it's not inaccurately representing what was the intent of the provider we're seeing. So, that's step one, getting it all pulled and together. But then, we take a couple further steps when we do that modeling process, right? Like I spoke of, labs can come in with many different units, or qualitative values come in many different ways. Some people like to spell them all out. Some people like to, just put half the word there. And so as we're pulling that information together, we go ahead and apply a standard code to it, be it a LOINC code, be it a SNOMED. So anybody trying to find the information has a very, very easy way to go hunt it down. And we also take the time to make those conversions, right? So if it's something that we can convert and get the data all in a very a standard unit, then we'll go ahead and do that as well. That makes anybody that picks it up able just to kind of hit the ground running with analytics, and they don't have to then take yet another step on top of what we've already taken time to pull out and do more cleanup on it. So yeah, so it's where I beam the most. So thank you.
Well, listening to all of you, I was thinking, there is this data quality framework of the European Medicines Agency. Here, I know from the audience where you come from, right? Everybody enter into the chat boxes that mostly you're from the US, but we also see some, from outside the US. And the European Medicines Agency's sort of quality framework and their dimensions, they actually talked about the journey of a data point. So there's a data life journey, and then we're thinking of a patient journey, but data go through its own sort of set of checks and balances, as Jordan, you said earlier, starting from when the data come in as messy data, and how would you code the data? How would you make sure you deal with missing data? How would you deal with dropout? How would you deal with censoring? How would you deal with at the end the text information? And given the sort of advances in AI, there will be more and more types of data that we can handle, and to get a holistic picture about the patient as well as the patient's journey. So that brings back to Lisa's point as well. So in this case, I also want to mention that when we think about data quality, a lot of that is EMR data are very useful for regulatory purposes. We always say something which is called the regulatory grade data, although some regulators don't like this wording, the regulatory grade data. We often say fit for purpose data, as we discussed earlier. So I want to focus on sort of some of the challenges or opportunities. So what kind of a regulatory challenges have you encountered when implementing AI technologies for unstructured data in EHRs? And how would you be able to navigate these kind of challenges? John, what do you think?
Thank you, Kelly, for the question. I was in the process of replying to
Okay.
Augustina, but this is
Yeah,
her.
let me repeat. What
Yeah.
kind of a regulatory challenges have you encountered when implementing AI technologies, and how would you navigate those challenges when you deal with unstructured data in EHRs?
Yeah, thanks again for the question. So I think the regulatory challenges um, are very well described in two places currently. I think one is a recent FDA publication in JAMA, um, the title FDA Perspective on the Regulation of AI in Healthcare and Biomedicine. Within that paper, the FDA very clearly lays out that they would like some alignment with the FDA's own life cycle approach. So essentially, to adopt a framework where there's an ongoing validation, an ongoing evaluation, kind of before and after deployment of these models, whether it's with structured or unstructured EHR data. So that publication, I think, is a must read for folks. Um, it highlights a number of different challenges and opportunities with regard to the use of AI. And another thing that comes to mind is a guidance document that was finalized this summer, also by the FDA, where again they talk about the use of not necessarily AI, but the use of electronic health records in regulatory decision making. And it's that's another, I think, must read for those that are interested in what the FDA's perspective is. And of course, I'm coming at it from a sponsor's point of view, working for Moderna. But I think for anyone in this field, I think those two documents, I think, are worth a look.
Great, John. Since you mentioned about the sponsor's point of view, Lisa, I mean, from sponsor and patient's point of view, what would you think in terms of the regulatory framework in terms of harnessing this type of data?
I can't speak on the regulatory, but I do think, as we become more patient-centric, especially in healthcare, the sources of data becomes even more important, especially when we know, depending on who you are, where you live, access to healthcare varies so much. And so it will be helpful for us to make sure that we keep that in mind from the beginning to the end of this process, because I think, Jordan, you had mentioned that the unstructured data and the messiness of the data and how you code it really speaks to the need here for us to be very intentional on how we collect the data, how we read the data, how we analyze it, because we want to make sure we're looking at it in a very holistic point of view, because the patient is the focal point here. But what looks like a patient in one area could be, very different depending on the disease state. And I do think those are some important points to be made here.
Great. And Jordan, from the solutions provider point of view, you just heard what some of the thoughts from two sponsors. What are some, considerations in terms of the regulatory framework?
Yeah, so I think you kind of have to look at regulatory in two sides, right? You have especially with large language models, because they're new and they came on so fast, right? And all of a sudden it was kind of like they were available and everybody should be using them. And so laws and regulations around how to use them, what you can use, what you can put in, what you can get out, is still trying to catch up. So we have to be very cognizant of that when we use them, right? Are we being good stewards of the data that we have, when trying to use something that's so new, and like you were saying, John, these articles are just now coming out, but people have been talking about using them for like 2 years now. So it's really how as the regulations are changing and moving right out from under your feet, how do you keep AI and be within the present and the now of the technology, but also being very conservative in a sense, right? So at a foundation at Veradigm, we're extremely cautious and risk averse, right? So we understand that the sensitivity around patient data and doctor and patient relationships that we have with our technology, but we have to ensure that we consider everything when we do something. And so right now, you know, and I said it earlier, you know, we use AI as a tool, as an additive, as a co-pilot to what we're trying to do. But anything that goes to, you know, any regulators is still very human driven, for the reasons that, you know, John kind of highlighted in those articles. It's just they're still trying to figure it out. And until, as a whole, from the sponsor side, from our side, until there's a clear picture, we need to use AI responsibly and as a assistant to us, but again, not remove the human out of the process.
Yeah, thank you. At the intersection between data and AI, there are so many questions that we can sort of consider, right? And these are really based on the evolving landscape. Things change rapidly. So, John, what would you think in terms of the timeline and criteria that authorities are considering for conducting inspection? For example, you know, when you think about AI technologies, how would you really make that understandable, trustworthiness, and you know, and also exact? And also, what expectations do they have regarding the use of AI in analysis, validation, compliance with GCP? And how would, you know, companies like those sponsors to really prepare those expectations in terms of RWD and AI in this rapidly evolving landscape?
Thank you, Kelly. You're asking me the tough questions. So thank you. Maybe I'll take a page out of Jordan's book. So she mentioned earlier that, you know, these papers that I mentioned, right, and then included in the chat, they're recent, and there's more coming. But this is not a new field by no means, and so this is something that's been discussed in the literature and by regulators for many years. I don't know the exact number, but FDA has approved a number of AI technologies in the form of software as medical devices for many years. I think it's like up towards 1,000, I believe, to date. And so only now are there guidance documents coming out, draft guidance documents coming out for public consultation that I encourage folks to read and provide their perspective and comments. But in terms of timeline, I think from what FDA has posted online is that they do expect kind of a formal guidance on the use of AI to support regulatory decisions for drugs and biologics here very soon, possibly as early as the beginning of next year. And so in addition, I know FDA has created a CEDAR AI Council that oversees and standardizes the use of AI in drug development. And so, again, you just see this kind of growing interest of AI by regulators. And on Tuesday, earlier this week, EMA held a workshop on the use of AI. I unfortunately wasn't able to attend, and I believe some of the information will be available publicly soon. But again, regulators just kind of thinking more about AI in terms of how you apply that to drug development. I think all of this interconnects with what we've been speaking in terms of appropriate data sources, appropriate research questions, and really what regulators are saying. Again, from a sponsor's perspective, you can't really color outside of the lines that regulators put forth. And so we're very much anticipating some of these new documents as they come out.
Great, thank you. I want to go to sort of questions raised by our audience. There are quite a number of questions, and panelists, you will be able to see the questions, but just going through them, you know, I think there are several themes. So let's just answer some of them. And the first one is really interesting. It's talking about not just say text in terms of words using text analysis, but rather there's a lot of further aspect to it, which is What about active listening? What about extracting sort of verbal reporting? Meaning, besides just the text, is there some other unstructured data that could also gain some insights? So, any thoughts?
Yeah. Kelly, I can take a stab on this one first, and then of course, welcome Jordan and John's comments here. For the work that we do with community engagements, the insights that we're generating come in all different unstructured data sets. So, for example, when we are engaging, we know that there is a reliability on the output, which is going to be very high because we know we're getting it directly from patients, caregivers, and community members. And so a lot of that is getting captured in these interactions that are either happening directly in conversations, or it could also be coming through questions that are asked during these engagements. And it culminates into also including feedback that we're receiving from community partners. So a lot of this is not really under the umbrella of just active listening as we know it, but really engaging directly within our communities and learning more about their experience on the ground. And so when we capture this data, we're actually striving to think of how we're not only expanding our engagements, but we also include it so that the data sources represent more holistically a utilization of word cloud for us to get some themes to understand in these interactions. Are we able to actually figure out what the experiences are based on the word clouds that we're extracting out of that? So I wanted to just make a mention that, again, this type of data that we're receiving are they're different just based on how they're getting captured in these interactions.
Kelly, if I can add on to that, I think, when we talk about it from the real world, data perspective, we're usually, the consumers of the data that's been captured. So, John, I think mentioned earlier again about hallucinations. And so when we think about AI tools at the point of care, and we think about, providers that are using, maybe something that, they're talking and using AI to write down that information for them, that's where the hallucinations become very important, because if it's not caught there, then once it's in that text form, then we don't know that is not representing what the communication between the patient and the provider really was. So currently, when we think about like documents and images and text, that's where we're sitting with the real world data, but we are very dependent on those tools and how they're being used at the point of care to ensure what we're consuming and what we're receiving downstream is accurately being represented. So it's not only making sure what we pull out of the text is accurate, but we've got to feel confident that the text we're actually reading is a good representation of what happened with the patient. So.
I think one thing that I like to add to that is that we often talk about, what insights can we get from the patient, right? And in terms of how providers, I don't know how common it is now, but there are some publications that have come out that have reported on, clinicians, providers at that point of care setting, right, in the doctor's office, using AI to communicate with their patients better. And the outcome of that has been truly impressive. I mean, you get more insights, you get better understanding, better communication between doctor and patient. And so I think all of that improves the data that comes out on the back end that is used for analysis. Again, I think just the use of AI is just really changing the way we do many of things.
And John, after reading through some of your responses in the Q&A chats, you also mentioned the importance of prompt engineering. In terms of generative AI, large language models, that's really important to ask the right questions. As we may know, traditionally for sponsors, we typically have somebody who is really a data translator. So there is a sort of a job role that if you look at Harvard Business Review, they said, this is the future job, which is data translator, meaning what does that mean? You have the data there and you have business, needs, you have questions, but this person really who is really capable is able to kind of put together and ask the right question. Now with these tools like generative AI, you may be able to expedite this process, but you still need to ask the right questions. So really, how would you think about some of the best practices in terms of engineering the prompts and asking the right questions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, maybe 18 months ago, nobody knew what a prompt was or what a prompt engineer was. But you're right. I mean, think that this is a growing field, and there are now available roles for individuals that strictly spend their 9 to 5 focusing on how to ask the right questions and interfacing with these large language models. Data extractor, you can call it a data translator. I think they're all in the same. But I think a lot relies on just the prompt that you're asking these models. And so in order to improve that, I think there is some trial and error. There are guidebooks out there that do talk about this, or some publication that talk about this. But it ultimately depends on what you're trying to get out of the interaction, the interface. Is it a data set that you upload and you're trying to find some clinical insights from that? Or is it that you just want to, again, communicate better with the patient? I think it all really depends. So I think there's an active area of research. But in interfacing, again, with large language models, I don't think there's a wrong way to interface. I think it just, you need to be able to, if I can say it, just speak digital. And so I think that comes with time.
And Kelly, if I may, I want to just add additional thought on that. I think what we have seen in the real world setting is how important language is. The words, the tonality of the words, the culture part of communicating, I think is so crucial to get the best insights and data. And so when you have these data translators, you want to make sure that we also have that in mind, because interpretation is key here. And there are some importance on culture, and culture could be defined in so many ways. So I want to make sure I preface that too. But I do think it's important to keep that in mind as we're looking at big data sets and we're trying to have these translators in place to make sure that they're also trained so that there aren't any built-in biases here as well.
Great, thank you.
I can just add on just a
Yeah.
second. So, having a prompt engineer, having somebody that knows how to ask the question is great, but you also still have to have that check and balance. Once the question's asked, a review of the output needs to be clinically reviewed. And if it's not, providing the appropriate answer, there are iterations through that prompting to get to a good spot always needs to continue to happen. So, having, again, somebody that has a very good data science prompting skill set still needs that check and balance of a clinical insight, or a nurse, a doctor, somebody that's used to reading this information to ensure the prompts that they think they're getting the right information back is actually clinically relevant to what they were trying to ask. So I was just like making sure we always have that check and balance in place.
Great, thank you. So we switched the gear a little bit about the accuracy of the AI solution. So what type of validation process do these models go through in order to ensure the accuracy of information being captured?
So, if I'll start, if that's okay. So I think, we keep talking about large language models, but that's not the only way to model, right? There's traditional models that have been out for a very, very long time that still hold their place and still have value. So I think each type of modeling, how you do the checks and balances, how you ensure the accuracy, how the precision, the F1 scoring needs to be evaluated with kind of every question you're trying to ask of it. So making sure when you decide what model works best for your use case, you need to lay out a plan. Where's who's going to start the process? Where does the check come in? How do we do the iterations? How do we make sure along the way that we have what we need and we're holding that accuracy? And then, the biggest part after you have great accuracy, when everybody's holding its hand, is how do you make sure that it continues to hold that accuracy as more data comes at it that might not look just like the data you started with. And so, I think it takes a framework, and you need to make sure when you start looking at models, you know what you want to use and what checks and balances need to go in that particular model framework, so you can ensure you have them along the way and make sure their accuracy is what you're expecting.
And the next question really builds on this one. Jordan, you mentioned, you just responded to the early question about accuracy. There's another question from the audience asking about AI reliability. Accuracy and reliability are not exactly the same thing. One is getting the right answer. The other one is getting the right answer, sort of repeatedly. And how would you ensure that, we're not just getting the answer sort of one-off? We want to be consistent in terms of getting the right answers using AI solutions.
Yeah, so there's a lot of tools. There's some tools out there that you can use that will help with, looking at training sets versus, a ground truth set versus, data it's never seen before. That will help you kind of develop that accuracy or that recall, right? That reliability that every time you go looking for the same like ejection fraction, that you're going to get the percentage that sits behind it. Those are a little bit easier to handle the reliability. When you get into more of the ambiguous questions, that's where it gets a little bit harder, right? And so I think with the more ambiguous ones, you have to take what you said and how you asked the question the first time to really sit and be reliable for its original use case. It can be a starting point for another use case, but it might not be as reliable for the second use case because the way you prompted it, the way you were asking the questions was very, specific to what you were trying to answer the first time. So those, I think, require a lot more hand-holding time over time versus more traditional modeling where I'm looking for an attribute, I need its corresponding result. Those you can kind of set up, model, and they can kind of kick off and run, and you can be prepared for a better recall and accuracy and precision over time. Hope that answered it, Kelly.
Yeah, that's great. And then also the audience gave lots of futuristic suggestions in terms of types of data, in terms of different modalities. For example, just to show you a few, they talked about video, they talk about, voices. They also talk about, how would you use the smart device to capture the keywords, sky's the limit. So my question is, here we're focusing on NLPs, we're focusing on EMR, sort of unstructured data. What will be your vision in terms of this field going forward? Thanks to the audience, this prompt engineered me into thinking about, futuristic sort of possibilities.
I mean, if I was to think big here, right, I think we have a lot of sources of data that we didn't have even a few years ago, where we have smartwatches. We now have a potential ring to kind of like capture our own health, and I think there's a lot of ownership now on patients and individuals to have a more closer relationship about their health and how to read their health on an individual level, which is empowering for them, right? Because then they can come in and ask more informed questions at the point of care, more so than where we've seen even a few years ago, where patients tended not to take control of the driver's seat, so to speak, in their health, but now they're in the driver's seat. And a lot of it is coming because they're empowered to do that. And I think that's really important, because as technology evolves and as we get more immersed in data, it's an exciting time for us to see how the ownership has moved from more of a larger entity to more of an individual level.
I'll be honest, Kelly, the first thing that came to my mind was Big Brother's watching. When you think of like all the data that's out there that you do have the ability to kind of get your hands on, right? If I think of it in, more of a healthcare area, and Lisa, I mean, this is kind of probably in your group or population of people that you deal with is, we get standard deviations of health information when we have that interaction with patients, and can gather that information. But there's also a lot that happens, to people that they just might not even think that, oh, that's actually impacting my health, right? And it's not on your smartwatch. It's, I'm going extreme here, but you like to take rights on red when cars are coming at you all the time or something of that sort. And so we can really get a full picture of what's happening in the patient's day-to-day world, that could really be impacting how they will eventually work in the healthcare system, how they'll respond to drugs, how they'll respond to vaccines, right? We rely a lot on genetics, DNA, to be the reasons we have reactions to things, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's your laundry detergent right after you got the injection that's causing some weirdness. And so having all that data and having patients have the power to input that information in somewhere that then can be brought in and captured and, joined, talking about bringing it back to, the first high level question we talked about on talking, what data are you looking for? Being able to merge and really make, like you said, Lisa, the patient the center, is, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens next, for sure.
Thank you, panelists. So we only have a couple of minutes left. We have many questions we would love to answer, but we need to wrap up. So what are your final thoughts in terms of real world data and AI together? So let's start with Jordan.
So I think the big thing is real world data is real world data. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to come out from the EHR beautiful, shiny, and ready to go all the time. And so having the capabilities of AI to help bridge that gap and to make that data more usable is a huge asset. But when we talk about AI, I've said it a couple times throughout this, it's a tool. It is something that we can use, we can leverage, but we need to use it responsibly and make sure that we're sitting in within the regulations, that we're respecting that the patient and the conversations they are with having with the provider, to ensure our use of it helps sponsors get the answers they need, but is respectful to our patient population.
And Lisa, what do you think?
I think it's an exciting time for healthcare. I think where data can be harnessed, it can help accelerate decisions. I will say that as we think about incorporating AI and big data, we still have to be intentional in preserving the humanity in patient care so that we treat the whole patient.
Great. John?
Yeah, just very quickly, I would say just AI in general is a disruptive technology, and it will continue to change how we do our day-to-day, especially world evidence research. Like Lisa said, it's a very exciting time. And I guess the question to ourselves is, how digital do we want to be?
Great. Thank you so much to Veradigm and to Reuters Events Pharma for this exciting session. We really appreciate everybody, very proactive in the audience, and we hope to see you again. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.